Alrighty. Well, again, welcome everyone, and we'll let each person introduce themselves, and we'll start with Leslie.
Hi everyone. My name's Leslie. I'm from Anaheim, California. I went to undergrad at UCLA and I took two gap years before coming here. So a fun fact about me is that my favorite food are probably green chilaquiles.
And what do you want to be when you grow up?
A doctor, internal med, maybe.
Destiny?
Hey everyone, I'm Destiny. I'm from Fort Lauderdale, Florida, born and raised. I went to Harvard for undergrad and then did a gap year working as a remote medical scribe. Fun fact, I can bench press 140. Favorite food, I'm not sure, something with chicken in it probably. And then when I grow up, I want to be an emergency medicine physician.
All right. We'll go with Jared.
Hey guys, my name is Jared. I'm from Yuma, Arizona, and I went to University of Southern California for college. I majored in pharmacology and drug development, and I'd say my favorite food is tacos al pastor.
And what do you want to be when you grow up?
I'm pursuing urology.
Very cool. Luis?
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Luis. I was born and raised in a city called Maturin in Venezuela, and before Pasadena, I was living in Spokane, Washington. That's where I went to undergrad. I went to Spokane Community College for my associates, and then went to Gonzaga University for my undergrad. I took a year and a half of medical school, working as a certified medical interpreter. And something fun about me, I don't know. I like to hang out a lot. My classmates don't know that, I guess. And currently, I'm interested in urology, not urology, sorry, in ophthalmology, but that may change.
And Jose?
Hey everyone, I'm Jose. I grew up in San Diego. I went to community college there at San Diego Miramar College, transferred to UCLA, and then I got a degree in biophysics and a minor in Spanish. I took some gap years. I took 5 gap years between undergrad and med school doing research, doing a post-bac at UC Davis. And when I grow up, I want to be an ER doctor like Destiny. And favorite food will have to go to Panda Express.
You know, it's actually started in Pasadena, close to Pasadena.
Yeah, I
Up,
think, yeah, I think I saw it. It's like kind of by where Luis is.
yeah. And everybody that grows up wants to be like Destiny. So there. All right. So the first question is the first question I was going to ask is what um if you could go back and talk to yourself during your pre-med journey, what would you tell yourself if you could travel in time?
I can take this one. I think I would tell myself to chill. Um, Medical school can be pretty overwhelming, and just figuring out how things work to get there is also very overwhelming, especially if you don't have a physician in your family, or you're going to a school that may not traditionally be targeting their students to apply to medical school. So there's a lot of moving pieces for that, and I think that stress can make it a little bit difficult to even start to navigate that system. And I would also say start be talking to people and developing those connections, because you never know who the person you talk to may know. And that is something that is also very encouraged throughout medical school in terms of finding opportunities, in terms of forming connections for professional development and whatnot. So I think it's a good habit to develop early rather than getting into the game and then realizing that there's a lot of things that are needed to be successful in it.
Uh, I got to answer as well. I think something I would have told myself was to really limit my time on like Reddit and SDN and stuff. I don't say that like flat out because they were helpful at some times, but also it could really lead you to comparing yourself with other people who will really flaunt the schools they got accepted into, their MCAT scores and stuff. So if you are seeking out help on those sources, just open those apps with like intentionality and knowing what you're looking for, instead of just kind of doom scrolling through it, because it could really get your head in a unhealthy place.
I call the people that sit on Reddit and those websites keyboard warriors because they're all like, they all know everything, but
At the end of the day, they're anonymous. They could just be making stuff up.
Yeah, I'd echo what Jared and Luis had said. And also on the more practical side, like applicable things, I'd say like if you're majoring in STEM, which I did, and I'm talking to my younger self, so I'd say build a strong basic science foundation because it's only gonna get it's only going to come back later. Like you think after the MCAT, you're done with the TCA cycle and genetics and everything, but it comes back med school and for your board exams. So build a good scientific foundation. And yeah, don't compare yourself. And I'd say enjoy the journey because that's really the fun part. Like making it is cool. You know, we're in med school now, that's cool. But the only thing I think is better than making it, or the only thing better than having made it is making it. And that's what I would tell myself because I put so much pressure on like getting to med school and then we get to med school and then, you look forward to your white coat and you finally get it and then you're like, oh, like now what? So you just got to keep enjoying the process. Destiny was in my small group and we had our white coat ceremony and I remember we were going through a rough unit with metabolism and we got our white coats and it was just, I don't know, it was like a weird feeling of like, okay, now what? For me at least. Maybe Destiny can speak on that too.
Yeah, it's definitely enjoy it. Enjoy it as much as you can. And, like, don't take any aspect of it for granted. This is such a hard journey, and like everything you do is something to commend yourself for. Which kind of leads me into the thing I wish I could have told my younger self is there are always going to be people who doubt you or think you're not cut out for it. Don't let those people like take your shine or your passions for it. If this is the path you want to be on and a journey you're committed to, no one can take that from you. You're doing a lot of things you're going to be doing for the first time in your life. So it's hard and it's difficult, and you may not have like a mentor. I didn't have a mentor going through it. So when I had people who didn't know me that well in my ear saying I wasn't going to make it, I believed them. Don't let anyone take that from you. You're hardworking, you're dedicated, and you know your roots and you know why you're doing it. So give yourself credit and don't let anyone shake you down because there will be people who try, just ignore them. It's so easy to listen to them, but truly just ignore them and just be steadfast in what you're doing. But yeah, like Jose was saying, it all pays off. All the little things that happen along the journey make it worth it.
I think what I would probably say to my pre-med self is similar to what Jared was saying. It's just to not compare myself to other people because I think all of our journeys are really different and all the things that we're doing, like I know it's easy to compare with like other people's like grades and extracurriculars and like stuff on that end. But I really think it's important to remember that like a big reason, right? Like something that can really set you apart, in my opinion, like when you apply to medical school is like your personal statement, and it's very, very different from one person to another. Even if you think you guys are really similar and you're like comparing yourself to other people, I just think that you have your own why medicine and why you want to do it. And I think I would always tell myself, and I tell my friends, like it's not a matter of like if I'm gonna get into med school, it's like when, because like if I don't get it now, I'll try again. Like it's just like if you're committed to it, like you're gonna be able to do it, and don't get discouraged by going on Reddit and seeing what other people are doing and like how many schools they got into. I just think it's only putting yourself down.
the other question is, what do you tell us what you do daily besides like studying and going to class? Like just give us like a typical day.
Yeah, I could take a stab at this one. And I think it'd be interesting because we have both first years and second years here. So our days look a little different. for us, second year is incredibly busy, but I managed to find time to go to the gym in the morning before class or rotations. And class or rotations basically take up my whole day. But afterwards, I like to, catch up with my family back home in San Diego, like on FaceTime, hanging out with my friends, even if that's just going over to their place or going to a coffee shop or something. But I was just mentioning this in one of the written answers, but I like to pour into myself and um, find things that fill your cup. And for me, that's spending time with the people I care about. Sometimes I'll go to Lisa's place and watch UFC with them. Um, and sometimes it's just like a quick FaceTime home after rotations or something. But there's little pockets of time despite how busy it gets.
I'll just add in to what Jose does in his day. He also goes to the gym at like 4 in the morning to move some very impressive weight. I can't let him not mention that part.
But I bet you bench more than Jose.
I could share my answer to that question. Uh, I'm also second year as Jose, so similar, very similar schedule to him in terms of how much time we spend at school. Most days, uh, I guess most days I'm busy from like I leave the house at 6:40 and I come back like around that time PM. So it's usually like 12 hours, but those like extra 3 hours at night could be really important for, I guess, your mental health and um, I just have to remind myself sometimes to make wise use of that time because even then it's still easy to like just be on your phone and stuff. But some things I try to do are spend some time with my wife, spend time uh, talking to family like Jose. I'll also go to gym sometimes. I'll read, uh, and it's just good to mix it up a little, at least for me. And another thing is to use your weekends really wisely. We have a lot less, I guess, school events on Saturdays and Sundays, and most of the time, at least one day out of Saturday or Sunday, I just do no work at all, and that really helps, I think, to get some rest and prepare myself for the next week.
Yeah, I can add a little bit since we haven't heard from first years. And this will be different at any medical school you go to. Our first year schedule looks very different than a UCLA first year medical school schedule, and that is fine. But whatever you end up, you'll realize that, people in classes above you will talk about what their schedule is like. And like, I know at least for me, part of like shaping my work ethic at med school was like, I met people like Destiny and Jose pretty early on and listened to what they said about how they studied and the things they did and that they didn't like doing. So I try to avoid those with the 10-foot pole. Medical school, especially if you're someone who took some time off of school, I feel like um, for me being away from undergrad and just working full time for a while, I think medical school feels pretty similar to that. Um, um, I think one of the things that makes medical school pretty unique is that if you do the work, you will get through. And in that sense, I try to treat it like a job. I try not to study past 5 or 6 p.m. because I have better things to do with my time, like watching the UFC with Jose. I've gone out with Destiny and Leslie a few times. Me and Jared play in a band together. He's a really good bass player. Um, so I'm engaged. My fiance is a lawyer here in LA, and so she's busy. I'm busy. So I think that also helps me keep mindful of that quality time we should spend together, or just doing things by myself. Like I go to the gym, I play guitar when I can, and I also like to just walk my dog around the city and just, I think also a big difference with medical school is that you have to be a little bit more intentional about your time off, as Jared was saying. It's very easy to always keep working when you're doing this, and there's always a little bit more to do. You can always study more, you can always do an extra clinical shift, you can always do a little bit more research. So I think a skill that med school will force you to develop is that you have to learn when to stop. And that's something that's going to carry not only through medical school, but the rest of your professional career. Because unfortunately, being a physician, for example, you can always do a little bit more work if you really wanted to. And learning how to put the brakes on that is going to be very important for your longevity and making sure you don't hate this after you've done it for a while.
I could share too what my typical day looks like. I guess for like a weekend, since I guess today's Saturday. Normally in the morning, like I go to the gym, I either go really early, like at 5, or I go late, like at 8:30. There's like no in between. So like on the weekends, I tend to go like more in the evening, and I just wake up and have breakfast. And then for us, we kind of have like a flipped classroom style where we have pre-work to do before we have class throughout the week for the first years. So I tend to do that on some of it on Saturdays until like 4 or 5. And then the rest of the Saturday, I watch a lot of like movies and TV, and I have my dog here. So I hang out with my dog. And I also live with my sister. So I hang out with my sister. So they're just some of the things that I do, and like hang out with some of my classmates, including Luis. So yeah, that's kind of like what I do like on a regular day. But it's definitely, I don't want to like say it's not a lot of studying, because I think everybody's experience is different. And I feel like I like it is a lot of studying, but I think it's really important to reiterate what Louise said. Like you do have to know when to put the brakes on it, and like when you don't need to study anymore. I will say that's something I'm still trying to learn how to do, just to be honest with everybody. But yeah, that's what my typical like Saturday looks like.
So some people want to know, why did you choose becoming a physician instead of like a PA or other health profession?
Yeah, I could share a little bit about that. Well, first of all, when I was very young, I mean, like, fresh out of high school, I didn't even know what a PA was, to be honest. I wasn't even on the track to be a doctor. Like, that wasn't in my radar. I wanted to be a firefighter, and I was working towards that. And in that process, you have to take EMT coursework and, rotate at a hospital. And when I was rotating through the ER back in San Diego, uh, I saw like a really crazy trauma come in, and I just saw the doctor kind of take charge. And it was the ER doctor, and I was like, whoa, this is so cool. Like some of the stuff I'm learning in EMT school, I can see here, but also there's like a whole nother level to it that I didn't even fathom. And like this guy was the expert at that thing. And I wanted to be an expert at it too. So that's kind of where I pivoted to want to be a doctor. And, a doctor's the subject matter expert for their specialty. And I just thought reaching the pinnacle of that and like focusing on one thing would be great. And for me, that was emergency medicine. I think PAs are great too. Though, the training is significantly shorter. I wanted like the longest training that would equip me to be the best ER doctor that I can be. Um, so that's why I chose doctor over PA. And I never like considered PA school because it just didn't appeal to me, to be honest. But shout out to PAs.
I think similar to Jose, I personally never considered PA or, for example, nurse practitioner education. I think one of the biggest factors for me was that I didn't want to count myself out from a surgical specialty. I happen to be interested in one now. I might not end up doing it, but it's okay. But that was one of the biggest things. A little bit harder for some specialties that are pretty niche to become a practicing PA, or, for example, ophthalmology. It's not a thing that really happens. Some other surgical specialties, you may be able to assist surgeries, but a little bit harder to lead them. And then also similar to Jose, like I guess picking a thing is something that was a little bit more appealing to me in terms of the flexibility and the education. I know for some people that's a deciding factor. They want to be able to go around things, which realistically is a big con of medicine. You pick something and you're going to be doing that. It does place a lot of pressure on what you do for school, but yeah, at least for me, that seemed to be something that was appealing as opposed to picking other paths. And it's something that comes up a lot. I'd love to hear other people's experiences. A lot, if you go on Reddit, you'll see people saying like, you should be ready to answer why doctor and not PA. I never got asked that in any of my interviews. Most people I know did not get asked that either, because I think It's important to consider in terms of like why you're committing to doing this, and I think that's a question for the individual rather than something that you're going to be expected to answer at an interview, for example.
Anyone else? Okay. I think
Uh,
that,
oh,
oh, go ahead.
I could answer real quick. I had a similar experience to Jose. Like, I guess all growing up, I hadn't heard of PA or NP, and I know those careers have been on the rise a lot recently. I had specific influences on my life who were doctors. One specifically that I could, who's a family friend who's a doctor who had a big impact on my life. And I think just seeing him be a like either when I was his patient or when I was shadowing him, like he was a true master of his art, and uh, he really showed me a lot more like than the science and the practice of being a doctor, but also the heart of being a doctor, and to really be trusted with the whole life of a patient. And I think that's something that really led me to want to be a doctor is the responsibility that it entails that I mean, I know like NPs and PAs do take a lot of charge of patients' lives and they're given a lot of responsibility. But at the end of the day, a lot of times that's all pointed back to the doctor. And so if you do seek that responsibility and think that you would serve patients well with your characteristics, that would I think that's what made me want to be a doctor.
Yeah, and I think it's really important for you to like it's a personal decision you have to make. There's plus and minuses for both. And do your research and figure out like what you want to do. Um, there's, like physician assistants, every state has a different set of things, and so just have to do it's a personal decision. One of the questions I wanted to know about what is the biggest challenge you faced during your first year of medical school, and how did you address it and overcome it?
Uh, One answer just comes to my head right away is that I had a lot of fatigue from the process you guys are in, actually, like the pre-med process. I was really tired. I really grinded throughout that period, as I'm sure a lot of you guys are, especially since I started college with like pretty low grades and I had to try really hard at MCAT interviews and stuff to recover. But there is a feeling, I don't know if my classmates share this, but once you get in, you're kind of like, oh, I'm here. Like I could rest now, and that is true. But I think my period extended a little longer, and I'm still learning how to be a med student. Really, last year with those shortened classes, the pre-work and all that, it was difficult to get those done on time because I just kind of wanted to go home uh, and like lay down. So it's been a challenge and like responsibility and stuff, especially that first year using my time wisely. But I think just seeking out help from different advisors, even mentors who aren't in the medical field, who are just like people at my church or hard workers in my life who I know have really been able to help me uh, like kind of recover from this process.
Yeah, I kind of also put an answer in the chat, but similar to what Leslie was saying earlier about how comparison can make things really hard. When we first started, it's there, you're gonna have classmates who've done like PhDs or research in like the minute details of cancer, whereas like I was learning a lot of stuff for the first time, so it was really hard for me. And then other people were just like cruising because they knew it already. And it becomes very easy to feel like maybe you didn't do enough or like you have to work harder. And to some extent, you do have to work harder to overcome that gap. But it made me feel like it was a matter of like, I'm not on the right path. Why am I struggling with this? But it really is just like finding your study resource. Just because someone else had more experience with it doesn't mean you can't master this content too. You just have to find a different way to do it. And it's okay to have to work a little hard on some subjects. There's going to be some aspects of the content you pick up really easy, and there's going to be some aspects that you struggle with, and you have to lean on your peers or peer tutoring, faculty for support. We had an amazing, um, what are they called? Facilitator, Dr. Gobadi, shout out Dr. Gobadi, who would do office hours and explain stuff to us if you were struggling one-on-one. And realizing it's okay to need help and ask for help. There's nothing wrong with that. Medical school is hard. You're learning a lot of things for the first time ever in life. The chances of you mastering it the first time you pass over it on a document are low. You kind of have to work a little harder at it. But I think I struggled a lot with that feeling of like everyone else really had a grasp, and I was like really having to put in work just to get a baseline understanding. But that's okay. Like, there's nothing wrong with needing a little more help. And I had people like Jose in my small group who I felt like I could talk to about what I was struggling with, and we would bond over that, and we'd figure it out, find out what worked for us, just keep moving forward.
Yeah, I echo that. And also Destiny and I are in the small group again this semester, which is awesome. And she's leading the pack, carrying the team. Um, yeah, I think two things come to mind with struggling. My first year of med school, the first thing, aside from the comparison to the classmates, which was very real, was I would struggle to lean on my strengths. We focus on our weaknesses, but there's things that I'm good at, that I think that I'm good at, and that people will tell me that I'm good at, and I wouldn't believe them because the imposter syndrome was way too loud, right? So like, I'm very comfortable with talking to people. So when it comes time to talking to like a patient in our simulation lab or a patient in clinic, I'm very, very comfortable to do that in both English and Spanish. And I forgot about that fact. I felt like, I don't know, for some reason I thought like, oh, this patient knows that I forgot the TCA cycle and like they don't trust me. But that's not true. They don't even care. They care that you care. And that's what I struggled to grasp um, up until, towards the end of first year. And then the second thing I struggled with was more on like a life level was I thought getting into med school would solve everything. Um, and it wasn't anything bad, but there are just things where I was like, I think once I get in my white coat, this problem will be solved. And it wasn't. So I say that to say, just pour into yourself before you get to med school because you're going to get there and you're going to make it and you're going to be like, now what? These things are still there. Whether that's like, like health stuff or anything, that's still going to be there. So the sooner you could address that before med school, I think the better.
I really want to add to the comparison point. I think it's really easy, especially depending on where you end up. A lot of us happen to end up here at Kaiser, which, as people know, it's a difficult medical school to get into because of the financial incentives to attend here. So as Destiny said, you will be surrounded by brilliancy, and that will not only be here, it will be anywhere you end up if you end up at a medical school. Uh, People who didn't work hard or didn't do those impressive things might have ended up doing something else, but like you'll see a lot of that in medical school, and it's fine. And I think something to remind yourself of is that whoever runs the place you end up at chose you. Um, so they saw something that was worth spending the time, the resources, the energy to get you to not only be accepted to a school, but also to commit to going there. And I think that's very easy to forget, especially again, as one is surrounded by brilliancy, and it's a little bit difficult to lean on like what got you to this point to begin with, or it's really easy to forget because someone has more publications or they had a career, or everyone has a different path, and that is just fine. And I would add that honestly, at least for me, like just talking to people, I think something that's very comforting in my own way is that everyone is going through it during medical school. Um, and if you don't ask, you might never know. Like your friends may also be struggling with the same things you're struggling with. The concepts that are difficult for you may be difficult for other people too. And I think building that community is important because it's pretty easy to get very isolated, very caught up in the work, very caught up in the grind, and not realize that the stuff you're doing may be difficult for other people too. And I think that, as Destiny also said, makes it a little bit easier to get support. And ultimately, I think the biggest transition, at least for me, was like every medical school begins with like a very review part of like basic sciences, which will be just like repeating your MCAT prep pretty much. I feel like that's what it felt like for me. The transition out of that is a little bit more difficult because then you're covering things that you're seeing for the first time, and it feels less like a review, and I think that can be a little bit tough. But again, uh, but if I could give a tip to anyone, is like find what works for you, and whatever that looks like, if it works for you, stick to it. Um, I know, for example, me and Leslie study very differently, and that's beautiful. What works for Leslie works for Leslie. What works for me works for me. But find that and stick to it, because like if you landed at that, that's probably because it was the right thing for you. And again, remember that you didn't just land at a medical school. Somebody had to make a pretty intentional choice to pick you and advocate for you to get to this spot. So you're worth it, and whoever's around you does not change that at all.
Anyone else? This is a question. How did you stay motivated while you were at community college, knowing the journey to medical school would be long? Choice you make.
Let her rip.
Jose and Liz. What's that?
I told Luis to take a stab at it.
Um, I don't know. I love community college. I have no complaints about it. In some ways, I liked it more than my undergrad. I think we made very unique people at community college, and I think that's a community that I miss sometimes while at medical school. Because realistically, not a lot of us make it into medical school for various reasons. Some people just don't want to do it, or people want to have other goals, and that's perfectly fine. But I don't know, like I think for me, having grown up in another country where medical school isn't a little bit differently too, a lot of these things were just means to an end. In terms of like community college, undergrad, gap years, medical school. So I think just keeping sight of that was important to me. I know transferring, I was like, I want to go somewhere that gives me a little bit more resources, because I know that can be a limitation of some community colleges, but I still talk to some of the mentors I had when I was a freshman taking English 101. I still talk to some of the friends I made during those like calculus classes. And yeah, I think just keep that in the bigger picture, and most importantly, enjoy the journey. You're not gonna go back in time. That's the one thing none of us can do, no matter how smart, accomplished, or successful we are. We cannot make time go backwards. Um, so I would say think of that, enjoy the journey, and also enjoy the work ethic around you. Again, I think Jose, I know Jose and I talk about this a lot, but I learned a lot of work ethic, and I learned a lot about other people just being at a community college and meeting people who are in different stages of their life. And I think, at least for me, 5 years later now, that's something that made it a little bit easier to get to medical school and meet people who, as Destiny said, have their PhDs, or they were had masters on this stuff, or they were really big experts in the field. Just like in a community college, you know, people who are like non-traditional students, or people who had careers beforehand, or people who are taking summer classes, or depending on what state you're at, high school students who are getting ahead, and you're like, why was I not doing that? Um, I think it made me really good at seeing other people, and also feeling seen around other people. And I think that's a skill that later on you'll be very thankful you have, because I think it's something that you notice and people notice, and something, if you go on Reddit a lot, people really like to talk about community colleges and how it's a shortcut or whatever, or how like they're not going to take you seriously. It's a part of who you are, and own it, because that's one of the best things you can do about not just college, but anything about yourself. So I don't know. Love my community college. Shout out Spokane Community College. Shout out Bigfoot. Would not be here without the experiences I got there, and that's a fact.
Yeah, I agree on
Jose.
what Luis said. And when I was going through community college many, many, many years ago, there was no pre-med CC to talk to people through. And there was a big stigma of people in community college wanting to go to medical school. It was basically like, good luck, off you go. But for me, honestly, I was like, there's no other option for me. I'm not giving myself a way out. And even though I might not feel smart enough right now, or might not be getting the highest grades, I'm just going to keep going until they kick me out. And that never came. I got, like a C on a pre-calculus test, and I was like upset, but they didn't kick me out. So I just kept going. And then before you know it, I get a acceptance email from UCLA. I'm like, okay, I guess I'll keep going there. Same thing. Another stigma there. Oh, you're a transfer? Like, oh, it's okay. I'm gonna keep going. And I'm gonna let them kick me out. I'm not gonna give up. And I'm gonna see how far I can take it till they kick me out. And that day still hasn't come. I'm in med school now, second year, halfway done, and they still haven't kicked me out. So I'm just gonna keep going. But it is a long journey. And when I look back on it, community college was hands down my favorite part. There's just something so beautiful about it, about the beginning, figuring yourself out, and actually making connections with people in the professional world. And actually, two of my letters of rec for medical school were from community college professors, and they were very strong. We maintained a relationship long after I took their classes, and I still talk to them to this day. And they always talk to their students about me, and like it's just really cool to hear from their students now. So, yeah, shout out to Miramar College in San Diego.
Um, yeah, no, I mean, I had somebody the other couple weeks ago saying that, oh, you go to community college and I don't know if you could, like you could get into to I was like, well, you know, you may feel that way, but I disagree and they didn't know who I was. And I was just like, it's kind of funny because almost every week I get like the dean of admission from Kaiser and UCLA and all of these medical schools show up every week, and we they know that we target community college students. I mean, it's open to anyone, but we focus on that group, and they keep showing up. So until last week we had the CEO of the Permanente group, and next week we have Dr. Willa Jacobo speaking. So it's like they obviously care because they keep showing up. So, unless unless they stop accepting our invitations, then at least they do want us. And so, um, yeah, and what do they say? There's always haters, haters. What is that song? Haters. Haters gonna what? Oh, there was a song. Haters are gonna hate. That's it. Um, The other question people wanted to ask was, how did you um how what did you guys do for the dreaded MCAT?
Yeah, I kind of answered that one like typing it out, but I'll shed some light on that here too. Um, for me, I picked a date, signed up for it. And then I reverse engineered my studying around that. So, for me, that would look like a lot of practice questions more than like sitting with a textbook and like taking pretty notes. It was practice questions because I feel like by the time you take the MCAT, you would have taken all the prereqs, all the coursework to where you have seen that material one way or another to some degree. So it's like in there somewhere. And the MCAT's going to test your recall. So I was like, I'm just going to do as many practice questions as I can and then do as many practice exams as I can. So for me, I used a lot of the double AMC question banks. I used UWorld and Jack Weston for cars mainly. Jack Weston is awesome because it's free and has a ton of cars passages. And for the double AMC questions, for the practice tests, I think there's five of them now. Uh, when I took it, there was four. So what I did was 5 weeks before my MCAT, I would take one of those every week because those are the gold standard. And then I would review them the week after. So I'd take one, like let's just say Friday morning, I would take one. Then Saturday through Thursday, review that one. Then Friday, take the next one. And that was my content review, just practice questions. I don't really think I looked at any textbooks. It was just practice questions, explanations, and that's how I did it. And it turned out okay.
Yeah, this is another topic where everyone studies differently, as Luis was mentioning in the previous section. Uh, what worked for you may not work for me. MCAT, I also wrote kind of my description in that chat question, but I guess just really quickly, I did do some like content review studying. I did some Anki, and I kept those Anki cards going throughout the whole like 4 month study period. But yeah, the practice tests, I used some blueprint ones and then the AAMC official ones and then some UWorld questions. Those were really important, but the thing I want to emphasize the most is reviewing those questions, review why you got them wrong. And something I did with all the tests, and it gets easier over time as you start getting less questions wrong, is to maybe make a flashcard of what you got wrong and make sure, like something I told myself is I'm going to review this question so that I never get it wrong again. Because or else there's no purpose to getting it wrong and reviewing it if you're just gonna mess up on it again. So I really think that was helpful to kind of go into it with that mentality, like I got this wrong, let's not do it again. And don't be discouraged by your early MCAT practice test scores because uh, it'll only be like a bright point when you get your later scores.
I could share also like what I did to study. I did similar things to other people. I studied from like when I graduated, I planned 3 months and I did like a month and a half of like content review and I mixed the books, the Kaplan books, in and out with each other. Like I would do 2 chapters a day from each book. I would start with like bio, then I would do chem, and then the next day I would do like physics, and then I would do chem. So I would just switch it up. And then after that, I moved on to the AAMC practice exams that they had on there. And also, I think there's like I can't remember what it's called, but it's like a fee waiver where you're able to get those exams for free, which I use, which I thought was really nice. And I started taking those exams, and I did one, and I thoroughly reviewed it. And then I did it again the next week, and it was like closer to my exam date, and I didn't like my score on it. So then I pushed my exam back. I actually just didn't show up to my first one, and that's fine. They don't say that you didn't show up. So I just didn't show up, and then I took it that it was supposed to be in September, and it was like the second to last date, and I moved it to January. So then I just started like part-time studying. Like I would do like a chapter here and there of things that I thought were really hard and do practice questions on UWorld and kind of like what Jared was saying. I would like thoroughly review my questions that I got wrong. And then right like a month before the test, I started taking the full length practice exams again. And that was really helpful. But I do want to acknowledge that like the UWorld question banks are really expensive. At least I thought they were really expensive when I had to pay for them. So if that doesn't work, I think the AMC question banks are still really good. But yeah, I just wanted to mention that I know like not everybody could afford that UWorld question bank. At least for me, like my sister, my mom, and me had it all put in so that I could buy it. So yeah.
Yeah, I'd also shout out, and I appreciate you for bringing that up so much, Leslie. I think studying for the MCAT will also look very different for different people because people have the opportunity to take time off and just study for it. And I think it's also important to acknowledge that for some people may not be the case. So, when you'll hear that like, oh, 2 month, 3 month study schedule, a lot of people who do that are just studying for 3 months for the MCAT. If you're someone who has to work full time or you have responsibilities or you have to sustain yourself financially or you have a family you're taking care of, that may look a little bit different. So I think it's also important to set those test goals with that in mind. If you're someone who's only going to be able to study on weekends, maybe 3 months may not be the best service to yourself. Um, because I truly believe after taking it, the MCAT is one of those exams that the longer you study, the better you'll do on it. Like anyone who's done it, you'll see it's a very linear progression. Uh, like you may hit some plateaus with certain test scores, but it's pretty certain that as long as you study and you like have access to those resources, you will probably be able to improve your score if given enough time. And I think that's the biggest limitation that a lot of us face. I took my MCAT fairly late. I took it the late spring of the year I was applying to medical school. So I knew for myself, like, I wanted to give myself the most time to study. And I worked a freelance job, so I took some time off. I was with my parents, so I didn't have to worry about those financial issues. And if you and the resources are expensive, I think if you only kind of like can make budget for one of them, I think the double AMC like comprehensive question and test pack is really good. Your world is great as well, but you don't get any practice tests with your world. So I think the best bang for your buck would be those double AMC questions. And again, resources like Anki are really useful with like recall and getting good at practicing the questions, and those are free. So find what works for you, and yeah, I think that's the most important. Like acknowledging what barriers may be in the way, because again, the MCAT looks different for everybody, and unfortunately, that's also why it's such a point of disparity with medical school admissions. Because by no circumstances the way the test is set up is equitable for people. And I think being aware of that can help you set a little bit better expectations for what it's going to take for you to get to the goal you have. Because I know that was very important for me when I took my MCAT.
Kind of touching on the financial aspect, I also shared a lot of resources. Like the euro was really expensive. I think I split it with two other people, and we would open test questions or like the what is AMC questions at the same time, and then we would just write our answers down on a piece of paper. So when we submitted, it didn't really matter who's went through, and then we would review it from there instead of us all paying for it. And on Reddit, sometimes people take their MCAT earlier than their UWorld subscription expires. So then they have like a month left of the UWorld Q Bank they're not using, and they'll just post it on Reddit. And if you're like the first one to respond, they'll give you their login and you can use their questions. But yeah, I really tried to use the free resources. I couldn't figure out Anki. I kind of like rage quit Anki pretty early on in the process because I didn't know how to use it. But if you could figure out how to use Anki, it's a great resource for studying for the MCAT. Um, but yeah, really sharing resources makes such a big difference. I was downloading PDFs off of random sites, which maybe could have given my computer a virus, but that's besides the point. Sharing Q banks, studying with people, because it really is so expensive. Everything adds up. So if there's any way to cut your costs, definitely try to. And then when I was prioritizing applications to schools, I was prioritizing places that would give me a little bit more financial aid because I'd already spent so much just in the study process.
Um, we actually the last in February we had about 6 or 7 sessions for MCAT. Go back and watch them because we have like 6 GB worth of resources like Anki decks, and you just have to go back to the events and download it. We've like beat the MCAT thing with a stick, but people always have questions. But yeah, we put like a bunch of resources and old tests and content that you could download with like 6 GB. So it's free. Um, anyone else? Anyone else wants to add to that?
Just one thing, Destiny kind of touched on it about studying with people. Like that's a great thing to share resources. Like that's awesome. Like I wish I would have done that. But also with studying with people, like if you can find like an accountability buddy, I think that will keep you on track too. I had my roommate at the time. He was also studying for it, so we had these flashcards, like actual flashcards from Kaplan, and we'd be eating dinner and we'd just be going through them together, or like, just keeping each other accountable. If you could find a buddy or a group of people that you're accountable to, I think that'll keep you on track. And it's very helpful and underrated.
Yeah, I heard like the group there's like 5 people that decide to study for the MCAT. So they rent out a place for I think 4 months in the middle of nowhere and studied for the MCAT, and they all did pretty well. So um yeah, I mean, yeah, whatever and everybody learns differently, and I think that's really important to learn how you learn. There's another question that is being asked is do you worry about debt while you're in school? And if you're from a lower income family, how have you managed the debt for education?
I'll start it off, I guess. So I do have some loans from undergrad, but thankfully I don't have to worry about those during med school because of deferments and everything. And even more fortunate is that we go to a school where cost of attendance is covered. So no loans or anything like that for medical school. I do still think about my loans from undergrad, but I just understand that if I really focus right now and like put my head down and work really hard, um, you know, there's a light at the end of the tunnel versus like other career paths. So I just keep that in the back of my mind. Like, yes, even though I might have to live a little leaner now, maybe through residency, long term, if I keep my head down and work hard, there's a payoff. And that's the thing about medicine. It's the mastering the art of delayed gratification. And by the time you get to this point, you kind of learn it. So that's my 2 cents because I do have loans from undergrad, but um, out of sight, out of mind for now, and then I'll deal with them later. That's the short answer.
I also want to add, we have Jared here, who's like our personal finance person at the med school, so his advice is going to be better than anything I say just now. But I think before you get there, unfortunately, that is just part of medical education. And to just have the privilege to like pick between schools based on financial aid is already such a big step in the process. Um, but I think that's something that doesn't get talked about enough, especially in the conversations we have about medical school. People talk a lot about matching, about going to a prestigious school, about going to the best name possible school you can go to because it's going to make things easier down the line. But again, if you're in a position where you're picking between what medical schools you go to, I think it's important to know the trade-offs that come with that. I know, and for most people at our medical school, like um, people are like, oh, like why would you go to a newer school, etc. And this happens across the country as well. Some prestigious medical schools may be a great fit for someone who doesn't have to worry about how much they owe by the end of it. But for someone for whom debt is an issue, for whom generational wealth is not there to make up for that debt. And that's kind of how it was for me picking my community college as well. For example, I just immigrated to the US. I had no SAT or anything, so going to a 4-year undergrad would have been pretty expensive. So community college was covered by financial aid, and that's something I did not have to worry about for 2 years. And I don't know. I lived in Spokane, Washington, so we don't have a lot of great schools in terms of names. But could I have gone to Gonzaga from the beginning? Probably. I would owe a lot more money than I do now because of that. And I think it's a good mindset to have if you get the opportunity to, let alone getting accepted to a med school, but several. When you're making those decisions, think of that financial aid because the people telling you to pick prestige on Reddit do not know who you are, do not know what your background is, and as far as you know, they're sitting on a lot of money themselves. Um, so I think that's an honest conversation that is not had enough in terms of transparency. not only how much you owe when you enter medical school, undergrad, etc., but also interest rates and how, unfortunately, they're pretty gigantic, especially for graduate education in the country right now. So, being able to pick is a great privilege to have, and I'm thankful that I had that opportunity myself. But I think something that the school that's the best fit for you may not necessarily be the bougiest, nicest school, but it may be the school that's going to let you have the brightest future financially. Because at one point, whether it's post residency or post medical school, no one's going to ask you where you trained. And the things that matter in your life are going to be more than the prestige people perceive about your career.
Yeah, second what both these guys said, uh, and uh, really, guys, value what Louis said about like the prestige and stuff. It's like he said, at the end of the day, you're still a doctor. And for example, I know my emergency medicine preceptor uh, failed to get in multiple times, and then he got into like what is known like as a really low ranked school, but at the end of the day, like he's an awesome doctor and I've learned so much from him. And so at the end of the day, it's what you make it. So if there's an opportunity to spend less money on med school, I would uh, definitely recommend that. But also something I want to point out, which is not very well known, is like so if you are blessed to be accepted into med school, realize that I mean they chose you out of a lot of people, and that means they want you to go there. And so some things that happened with me is that like I called some schools, and even though like they don't send you a scholarship up front, if they hear like, hey, I want to go here, but this other school is more affordable for me, they might like give you an offer to go to their school for less money. And that actually happened to me like my state school, which I would prefer to go to Kaiser, but at that point I hadn't been accepted here, and thankfully they were offering me some money. So like definitely try to make moves. Don't just like sit still with like, oh, I got accepted to school with like 60 grand in tuition per year. Um, Definitely try to make relationships, talk to people and stuff because it is a hard process and uh, it could be it could feel very unfair. Uh, but I mean, if there's scholarships available, if there's opportunities to talk to like the financial aid officers and stuff, definitely take advantage of that.
Anyone else? So yeah, so this process is pretty long and hard, but once you're done, they're gonna make it rain for you. There's gonna be a lot of offers for you to work, to work. There's also state of California, if you decide to work in an underserved area, they'll give you up to $300,000. So once you're done, there's going to be a lot of, there's a lot of groups like Kaiser. If you're willing to work in like certain communities, they'll give you 0% interest rate on housing, and if you want to buy a house, or they give you bonuses and pay off some of your debt. Um, just the thing what I always tell people is like it's it's an investment that you make, and so in California, if you want to buy a house, I think it's $600,000 on average, and you're putting in it. You have to put up money down to buy that house. Nobody's going to give it to you for free, and you're going to have to work for it every year and pay it. And this is kind of like your education, it's medical school or law school, or you're putting an investment into something you're gonna get a big return. So if you have a bachelor's degree, you make I think 60 to 70,000 starting out. Yes, you go to medical school after all these years, but when I mean residency, you get paid pretty good. Not a lot, you work a lot, but average starting out physician in California is $240,000. So you're taking an investment, and that's like the lower end of like pediatrics, $240,000, $250,000. And Yeah, so it's delayed, you're making an investment and you're delaying that return. Now, if you want to compare it to tech billionaires, yeah, you probably should become a tech billionaire if money is your only thing, but you're going to be compensated well. Unemployment is so low for physicians that the Department of Labor doesn't even keep that statistic because the only reason physicians don't work in the US is one, they don't want to. They've found another gig that makes them a lot of money. Or second, they lost their license. Like you've done something really bad that they've taken your license. So, um, I mean, if you're coming from low income, I could tell you that I feel that pain, but it's a sacrifice you got to make, and um, and if you want to keep, with the Joneses, then uh, it's going to be hard. So, um, people want to know what did you do in undergrad to gain clinical experience and clinical exposure, and what recommendations would you have for people?
So in undergrad, I was a part of a program called like the Cope Health Scholars Program at Kaiser in Anaheim. So for that program, we basically just shadowed, I mean, not shadowed, we volunteered at like different floors, like Gen Surge, and then just all the different floors throughout Kaiser's. And you can be in that program for as long as you wanted to be in that program. Typically, people only stayed for like you could do like a 3 month route, a 9 month route, or a 15-month route. But again, it could go as long as you wanted. And the minimum was like 4 hours per week. So I would, go back home during the weekends and I would do my 4 hour shift, or sometimes I would do two if I like wanted to do an extra one. So that's what I did for like clinical exposure during undergrad. Um, and I also was able to like meet a lot of Kaiser physicians there. And then they would let me shadow them. Like I shadowed a lot of OB-GYN physicians and just like primary care physicians. And I saw some surgeries, which was nice. Um, so that's what I did for clinical experience during my time in undergrad.
Yeah, I could speak on this too. So in community college, it was a little harder for me to get clinical experience, but um, there was this hospital in San Diego um, that would just take volunteers from anywhere. Obviously, you had to meet certain criteria, but it was like pretty straightforward and similar to Leslie's experience. It was 4 hours a week um, in different departments, and you get to like choose which one you prefer. And it was pretty cool. I'd go sometimes in between classes or after class. And that was the extent of my clinical experience in community college. And then when I transferred to UCLA, there was a program, I forgot what it was called, but basically you get like 2 credits or something, like pass fail, and you get to do research with a PI there. And it just so happened that my PI was a cardiologist. He was also Latino. And the research that he did entailed actually talking to patients and like recruiting them for our study. So I got to shadow him and see him work, but also talk to patients one-on-one about our research. And I gained quite a bit of clinical experience through that. And then that was the extent of it, I'll say. Um, it was more about the quality of the clinical experience versus the quantity. So I could have done like little things here and there, but I'd rather do one thing good than a lot of things kind of, so.
Yeah.
Go
Uh,
ahead. Go ahead, Jared. Go ahead.
are you sure? Okay. Yeah. Um, I agree with Jose. It's good to show like kind of consistency with somewhere, and I would say also just like take up the opportunities that you can get. Don't be worried about them being like relevant enough to your future specialty or something. Like, uh, I would do 4 hours a week volunteering like with a nursing team at a local hospital here in LA. I wasn't spending time with doctors. I was like working with nurses and like essentially getting blankets for the patients, and uh, I wasn't allowed to do nursing stuff. I was doing like chores, uh, but like that was helpful. Like 4 hours a week kind of builds up, and on the MCAT you do have to state how many hours you do for each thing. So it's nice to say like I did 80, 90 hours of this instead of saying like four here, three here, and stuff. Um, and another thing that helped me is like during summer vacations, if I did go home, like freshman and sophomore year, I I was from a smaller town, but just try to build relationships with doctors back home, even if they're in private clinics. Um, they're usually kind of pretty excited to let a student shadow because they're not at an academic institution. Like they're not used to having people ask if they could shadow. So I was actually able to have quite a few experiences back home shadowing. So yeah, whatever free times you get, it's okay.
Yeah, I'd add that like Jared was saying, because with all of these experience, you will get to the point where you're applying, you have your AMCAS application, and you're writing about them, and you really want to make sure it's something that meant anything to you. I think it's really easy when you're sitting in front of that screen and you're like, oh, like I did this, I don't really know what I took away from it. So I think that intentionality is going to be very important. And also shout out what Jose was saying that almost every hospital in the country has volunteer programs, for example. So that is a really, really, really good place to start. If you can't find anything else, there's also a lot of clinical jobs. The training, for example, if you're to become a nurse aide, most nursing homes in the country train you to do it. You just have to work for them for a few months. But if you have no other into it, that's a good way to start and also develop, another professional skill you can use in the future. For me, being bilingual, I became a medical interpreter. There's something called the Certification Commission for Healthcare Interpreters. They offer like national credentialing, so that was what I chose to do. Um, it's a job that I missed today, but it was very fun, and I was very physician facing. So a lot of physicians that I shadowed, I met through that job, and again, putting your face out there, people recognize you. Similar to Jared, I was a lot smaller city, so most doctors I ended up shadowing through my work, they didn't really get students that often. So it was a good opportunity to, again, just build relationships with people. And I really want to emphasize that you want to get good at doing that because it's something you're going to have to do all throughout medical school and probably throughout residency. It's a small community. There's only so many physicians in the country, and a lot of them happen to know each other. So putting yourself out there and being presentable is going to be important, whether it's to find those opportunities, meet people at your local medical schools, or just, again, you never know who you're talking to. My first shadowing experience, I met through a guitar professor I had in college because he gave private lessons to a physician in the city, and that's how I got to meet him. So again, you never know.
Yeah, I we did a session on how to gain clinical experience, and I always tell people is like the hardest part is getting into a hospital. So the easiest job you could do is patient transport, and I think here pays like 26 bucks an hour. And only thing you need is a CPR. It's a 4 hour thing you need to go do, and you push patients around, and you're inside of a hospital, and you meet a lot of people. If you speak another language, obviously like Spanish is a big one in California, but also like there's communities that meet people that speak Ukrainian and Urdu and other languages, and uh, in and they will take you on if you pass. Hey, Lucy, can you put this information about becoming a certified translator in the chat? Because like at my work, I just had to like be interviewed, and I get paid a couple of dollars extra because I speak a couple languages. Uh, but I'm like a pretty like I have a clinical job, so it's kind of different. Um, yeah, and so I think you just need to find and the other part of it too is I would just say is don't go look for the big hospital because like for example if you're at UCLA, don't go at UCLA Medical Center because they have a lot of pre-med. Go to somewhere that's less like that's a smaller community. That's the only thing that I would just say. What about Destiny and Leslie? Any words of wisdom about clinical experience?
Yeah, I think I said that I did the co-POS scholar program, but also
Mm,
like more to plug, I guess more, I think more of my clinical experience or more of my meaningful clinical experience came from like my gap years when I like worked and got a job as like a medical assistant at like family care clinic and then a psychiatry clinic. I was also a medical assistant. So I think both of those jobs really gave me a lot of insight into like direct patient care because you're like working with the patients instead of like just volunteering. Like a lot of what I did like at the Cope Health Scholar program was kind of like what Jared was saying, like just giving blankets, feeding patients, ambulating patients, walking with patients, which are all really meaningful. But I think that like actually working with patients during those gap year jobs was really insightful and it gave me a lot to talk about during some of my interviews as well.
I had kind of an unorthodox experience. I had almost no real clinical experience. A lot of it came from me just reflecting on my time in clinical spaces. I spent a lot of time in a sports medicine clinic as a patient, and there were just a lot of complications that resulted in me being in there for a couple of years, like once a week, not like I was living there. And it came to the point where like the staff joked that I was a part of the staff, so then they would let me help other patients with their physical therapy sessions while I waited for my parents to come pick me up. And I shadowed the orthopedic surgeon who did my surgery, and this was all before college. And then when I got to college, I was working three jobs, so I had no real chance to do any clinical shadowing, working, et cetera, because I was working on the campus because I didn't have a car. And then COVID hit, and I'm from Florida, and it was running rampant in Florida, so hospitals didn't really want to take on new people, which is understandable. There was a high transmission rate going on. So I pivoted to remote work. That's where I first got into like the concept of being a remote medical scribe and helping doctors transcribe their notes a little bit quicker so that they could focus more on the patient focus aspect. I got to scribe for I think nephrology, ortho, and a primary care physician maybe, and I got to see what the different specialties are like, what the different physical exam things they look for are. And I thought that was pretty cool. And then there was this YouTube, I can't remember what it's called, but I can maybe find it, put it in the chat if I find it before this ends, where you could virtually shadow, like a doctor would be live and like take you through a day in their life. So I had to get really creative about where and how I found my clinical experience, which made it pretty tough. And I felt like my application was not as strong because of it, but in the end, it worked out. So there's definitely ways to find clinical experiences when it doesn't feel like there's any. You may just have to get creative about if you're doing it remotely, if you're reflecting on times where you were a patient and then transition to something else, and seeing what's happening locally, because a lot of the big hospitals at the time didn't want a student just walking around wreaking havoc. Um, yeah, I had to get pretty creative, so I had a little bit of an unorthodox experience with trying to get clinical experience.
I just want to add something extra, kind of similar to Leslie and Destiny, like gap year and jobs. I was also a scribe during my gap year, and that was a lot of time, and it was a full-time job in a clinic, so you could add up hours really quickly. But also, it helps you a lot with note writing, which is a pretty big part of your first and second year of med school, and it gives you a lot of exposure to like how different doctors work. At least for me, like I got a job at a urology clinic, which I didn't know about urology, but now I want to be a urologist because of that experience. So that was something part of my journey that I really value. And one more thing during gap year, definitely update the schools that you want to go to. And like I sent Kaiser an email like in December, like, hey, by the way, I'm working as a scribe here. I'm planning to do it towards the end. Then in April, when I still hadn't got it accepted, I told them again, like, hey, I've been here for much longer. Like, I've learned a lot. That's what I value and stuff. So if you do get more clinical experience, don't let it just go to waste. Definitely update those schools. Be annoying.
Yeah, I always tell people that like physicians work about 68, 70 hours a week and like asking them to like mentor people is just, but if you're in there working with them and doing things, it's much easier. It's all about getting into the hospital. Um yeah, and so this is s- somebody's asking what advice would uh would you give to someone who's in the application cycle for 2025, 2026, or the one that's coming? What advice would you give them? Words of wisdom, like primary, secondary, all that good stuff.
I think something I want to shout out is that you do not have to submit your application the first day it's available to do it. Um, a good application is much better than an early application, and once you send this stuff out, you cannot resend it. Um, so don't like applications open in what, like early June. Don't send your application in December unless that's the only time you're ready. But I think a lot of the things that are sort of like Reddit as the end is things like, oh, send your application like the first day. And I know I sent mine within like 10 days of them opening, and I know that was plenty of time for me to be verified. Um, before that window closed. And I think that's true for most people. The only benefit to submitting super early is that it may take you a little bit less time to get verified, but usually that shouldn't be a delay to your application. A lot of us talk to other people and we're like, oh yeah, we applied at this time. And you'll see that you may have applied for a school early, never heard back, and someone who applied to that same school in December got a secondary or an interview a few weeks later. So it's something that's not very transparent to us as students, unfortunately, but it's not as straightforward as like if you get there super early, you're gonna hear back. And then this may sound cheesy, but I would say focus on taking care of yourself. Applying to medical school is a big, big, big waiting game, and the wait only gets worse as you move along. I think for me, the worst part was waiting between secondaries and hearing back from interview invitations. That was the worst part of the wait. Um, because you're gonna submit your stuff and you're gonna be up in your game writing. I didn't personally pre-write anything. I just dedicated myself time to write my applications. And I don't regret that. I used that free time before for other things. Um, but again, that's very personal for each individual, how long you want to spend writing your things. But you're gonna get your primaries, you're gonna submit that. That'll take some time. You're gonna submit your secondaries and you'll be running around. For most schools, you can go, and this is one of the few good uses of STM. Like the prompts for previous interview years are there for secondary, so you can look those up. And I would say you can pre-write if you want to. I think, and maybe the rest of the group will agree, most medical school secondary questions are different forms of the same thing. Like most questions will ask you about resilience, about something you've struggled with, about mistakes you've made. So I think if I were to go back and pre-write, I would just talk about threats because I think it gets really tedious after, depending on how many schools you apply to. After the 10th secondary, you feel like you've written the same things a million times, and that can get a little bit exhausting. Um, I would also say write the schools you really want to go to first, just because that's the least burnt out you're going to be when writing secondaries. I know for me, my last ones were terrible because my brain was just not there anymore. And again, practice that self-compassion, and I don't mean it to be corny. You are gonna submit your secondaries and you'll realize there is nothing for you to do. But wait. So make sure you're having fun. Stop checking your email every single day. And practice that because it's gonna be very important. Like I think for me again, waiting in between interviews was tough, but I feel like the window to hear back from interviews is usually much shorter than when you sent your secondary and you got invited to an interview, depending on who you are. Like I know people who heard back from a school that they applied for in August and they got invited to an interview in February. That is almost 6 months of waiting. So again, have things to do because you will be losing your mind while you wait. And I think it's important to not get caught up in that.
Yeah, I think that's really sound advice. I do wish I had pre-written more secondaries personally, but that's just because my work schedule is really busy. So I had to spend a lot of time at work writing them. Um, I do think something that really, really helped me out, and a lot of people can benefit from in the cycles is interview prep after your secondaries. I did a lot of the Mi Mentor practice interviews, and I would be doing one like every week, basically since submitting my secondaries. And it paid off because for Kaiser, I think I got like a 2 day notice, like, hey, we have an interview on Tuesday. Can you make it? And I had been doing so many interviews by then where I could just roll out of bed and like interview and be okay. So if there's that's something more practical I'd recommend. Just doing practice interviews after your secondaries. Definitely seconding what Luis said about taking care of yourself because that's just a good habit to have in life, whether you do medicine or not. Um, yeah, I think those are the only things I have to add to what Luis said.
One thing for secondaries I felt helped me, I also pre-wrote them and I would do a lot of just like copy and pasting and then like readjust them for the school. For every school, you really want to highlight something about that school in your secondary. Like it's very, it come if you have a very generic or general response, it's very easy to read it as that. So make sure you've like looked at the school's website and incorporated one thing about that school that stood out to you, because then it's clear to them that you've done even a little bit of research on the school. And then in terms of like secondary content, I don't know how helpful it is for everyone, but for me, it was helpful. I had like a childhood best friend and then a college friend look over my secondaries because it's very hard to put your story on paper and like you'll put it down and then your friend will read it and be like, you're selling yourself short. Like you could add this thing, this thing. So it helps have someone who knows you better also take a look at it, even just for grammar. But yeah, had a couple eyes read through all my secondaries. They were very generous to do so because I had this large document with all of my secondary prompts on it and it took them a while to get through. Yeah, your friends are a good resource. They don't have to be pre-med, medicine, doctors, or whatever to read over your secondaries because your secondaries are a way to really connect you to medicine and you to a school. And a lot of that is just who you are as a person. So yeah, you definitely use your friends as a resource if you can.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many parts of the application. Similar to Luis, I turned my applications in over a span of time. And I was kind of stressed for not turning them in early and pre-writing them, but I think my last one got in like in September, and it worked out. So definitely, don't get too worried about that. Um, and similar to Destiny, a really important thing is to ask others to read your essays before submitting them. Uh, and really take time to tailor them to the school and everything. Find someone who's close to you who's also a good writer. Uh, I know my wife's a really good writer. You might have like some friends at school that majored in writing or something. But just ask them to be brutally honest with you. Uh, and it might get you frustrated when your essay's marked all over. Um, but have them tell you like, oh, hey, you sound selfish in this part. You sound like a show off in this part because we all want to talk about our research, our experiences. Um, or, oh, hey, like you sound like you're trying to make them feel really sorry for you or something. Or like Destiny said, yeah, you're selling yourself short. So you want that criticism from others to make sure that you're not kind of like uh, just blindly writing them without knowing how others are going to perceive them. Similar for your personal statement. And for interviewing, I would say like try to look up some common MMI interview questions because those also get repeated throughout the interviews. And for those, I mean, each school's going to have like their personal ones, but um, for the common ones, try to come up with like something that you would say, like some bullet points that you would touch on, and also think about like a nice compliment for the city that those schools are in. So if you're from like Minnesota and you're applying to Arizona, like even though it's super hot, like have something nice to say about the
Mhm.
weather or something, you know? Um, so yeah, there's just a few things I would recommend.
So the moral story is from Destiny is find good friends that could edit, and Jared is marry someone who's smarter than you. Destiny, do you want to talk about your 2 week rule?
Yeah, I don't know like how true or not it is, but I tried to use a 2 week rule. I felt like it was helpful. So from the day the first application opened, I think I submitted it within 2 weeks. So I definitely wasn't a day one submission. And then for secondaries, within 2 weeks of getting the email requesting one, I wanted to have it back to them. Because it's also like the further into the cycle you get, the less spots there are available for them to offer. So you want to have a quick turnaround. But I felt like saying 24 hours was just like too strict, and even a week was a little too strict because you never knew what your week would entail if you had time to edit a new secondary. So I felt like 2 weeks was like a solid middle ground. And then I had some time to workshop it if I didn't like how it currently looked and I pre-wrote it, maybe get some eyes on it now that I know this is a school that's seriously considering me. Yeah, 2 weeks is pretty fair, and it also makes sure you don't forget to do secondaries. It can be very easy if you submit your primary and then happen to get 10 secondaries at once. It can be a little more stressful. So 2 weeks gives you the time to get those all back in like a timely manner. It also looks good to the school that you took the time to get that back to them. Yeah, I don't know if it like helps your application or not, but it helped me just stay accountable in the process because I applied to like 30 schools because I didn't know what my chances of getting in were, and it was hard to do 30 secondaries, which also leads me to another piece of advice. Be very intentional about where you apply. If you are not willing to do a secondary to every school you apply to, don't apply to schools for no reason. It's also expensive. So like try to be intentional. Don't apply to like five, but don't apply to 50 if you don't want to do 50 applications.
Um, yeah, a doctor that I know that works with the interviews for a medical school, and he said, I'm always amazed that pre-med spend all this time and effort into their application, MCAT and everything, and then you ask them why you want to go into medicine, and they look at you, they've seen like a ghost. So probably should have that question pretty pat down. That's the one thing he said. We're almost done, and so just before leaving, just wanted to ask each of you share one word of wisdom or any kind of last comments before we depart. Besides finding, better friends and marry out of your league.
I we do a lot of like interview panels for students interviewing at Kaiser, and I think something that always comes up, and I'm gonna quote Destiny on saying this, and it's have some self-compassion, and I really mean that. Getting through pre-med, through medical school, through the application cycle, you're gonna have to do this for residency again, fellowship if you're going into that. It's really tough, and at least for me, like I think it can be traumatic for some people, especially applying to medical school and really having to put yourself out there to a panel of people who you don't know. You're trying to convince them to take a chance on you, and that can be very difficult. It can be very vulnerable, and depending on what you've been through, it may feel very humiliating to have to put yourself out there in that way. I know it was for me. I'm talking about my journey immigrating, what that was like, what my family has been through, what I have been through. It's not easy to do, and I think self-compassion is very important in this process. I cannot emphasize that enough. Um, for your longevity, for your chances of burning out, for making sure that you, once you get to where you are, don't forget why you wanted to do this to begin with. Um, and secondly, if you get the opportunity to get to a med school, remember that these people chose you and someone thinks you are worth it. Um, it's very easy to get caught up in like, oh, I didn't get accepted to the school I wanted to. I didn't get as much money as I wanted to. I didn't get in the first time. Um, I think even though it doesn't seem like it when you're going through it, as a student, you have a lot of power in where you choose to go. And I think once you get past that hump of getting into a school, I think you have a lot of power in those decisions. And that's something that you should own up. You should own up the opportunity and you should own up your efforts to get to that point. And I think that comes through self-compassion and self-reflection in what everything this journey entails. It's difficult. It takes a lot to figure it out, especially if you didn't have like the connections growing up, or that's not just the context of your life. And that is okay. Um, it's not impossible to beat the odds. And I think the most important thing is educating yourself on what your limitations are, be it from context, from connections, from a socioeconomic standpoint, and taking those steps. I think all we can do when it comes to this is try. And you should be very proud of you for doing so because it's not an easy thing to do.
Luis hinted at it earlier. My advice would be take care of yourself during this process in whatever capacity that looks like for you. It's such a long process. It does not end with the medical school application. It doesn't end with medical school, etc. Whatever the things are that bring you joy outside of this process, nurture those, make time for those, bring them to medical school with you. If you're someone who likes to run 10 miles a week, put that in your schedule. If you like to play video games, put that in your schedule because it's so easy to get to this point and then make school the only thing you do or the only priority. But you're going to be so much more than a medical student, so much more than a doctor. And there are realistically going to be other things that bring you joy in life outside of this. Nurture those things. Do not leave them behind. They are equally important to you and equally important to your happiness. Yeah, take care of yourself. Don't check your email every day. I did it. It made me anxious. It made me sick to my stomach. Like, submit your application, go do something fun. Submit a secondary, go do something fun. Like, you've made it this far. You'll make it through this next chapter. Just don't forget to find joy in the things you love outside of this process.
Yeah, I think all that was beautifully said. Yeah, the med school process and life in general is tough. I mentioned this, I think, in my bio and in one of my written responses here. But it took me 12 years from like the day that I said I want to be a doctor when I was in the ER, like shadowing or as an EMT student, to getting my white coat. That's 12 years. That's like 4 bachelor degrees worth of time. Um, and it wasn't easy. It was rough, a lot of doubt, a lot of people that I cared about doubting if I could make it. Um, and I always told myself, think of the story you're gonna tell yourself if you keep going. And it was as little as like, okay, think of the story you're gonna tell when you transfer. And then I transferred. And then, okay, think of the story you're gonna tell, when you finish college. And I thought about that. And even with med school now, it's like, think of the story you're gonna tell people when you finish that. And if you go through that, if you give up now, you're not gonna be able to tell that story. And here I am now, like telling the story of what happens when you keep going. I get to help patients in clinic all the time in Spanish, which was my goal. And I'm going to be able to do that as an ER doctor. Um, it's a long journey. You make mistakes along the way. And Luis said this before earlier, but you can't change the past. And it's going to feel like a long journey. But you also can't speed up time. So wherever you are, like that's where you are and like make the most of it. You're moving as fast as you possibly can. And like that's it. There's nothing you could do to speed up time. And there's nothing you can do to change the past. So just make sure your present self is taken care of, nurtured, your cup is full, and enjoy the process. That's what I'd say to all of you watching.
I think I'd probably tell you guys to when you guys get into a school, because you're gonna get into a school, really take that time to like just reflect and be happy of where you've gotten to. And if you can, I know it like not everybody can, but like take that time to like really relax and take that time off and really enjoy the time between like starting medical school and getting into medical school. I feel like that's such a great time in like your life and where you're like super proud of all the accomplishments that you have and you have so much to look forward to before like med school actually begins. So I would really say to just really enjoy it and really be proud of yourself and celebrate with those who have supported you throughout the way, have heard all your complaints and like anxieties throughout the interview process and the waiting process, because it's like very much a waiting game. So yeah, that's what I would say. And just to when you are waiting from the time that you get like an interview to your decision, just try to have as much patience with yourself as you can, and not don't check like everybody's saying like don't check your email all the time every day. Like it's just gonna drive you insane. Personally, like I never looked at Reddit because I was scared of like self-comparison and I already like had a lot of imposter syndrome and I felt like for sure that would exacerbate it. So that's something that I steered away from unless it was like from when I was making a school list. I thought it was really helpful. But other than that, I never looked back at Reddit or like SDN. So that's what I would tell you guys.
Yeah, I think all these people gave great advice. Definitely uh, go easy on yourself. I mean, none of us are perfect. We've all failed. Uh, we've all gotten bad grades. Take those lessons and move on. Also, I would say don't make med school or don't make med school or pre-med your life. Make it part of your life. And it's really easy to join all the pre-med clubs at school and to study a lot to try to get as much clinicals, but you're going into a career of service and definitely try to serve others in during this time too. Don't just wait till you're a doctor. Like, do it now. Find some community outside of the pre-med community. Uh, talk to your family, serve the nearby community, go to a church, like whatever you could do to just be around non-medical people. It'll really calm your mind, give you some peace, give you some other perspectives. So I think that's what I have to say.
Alrighty. Well, I think everybody went, right? Perfect. Alrighty. Well, thank you again for all of you making time. Thank you, Jose, for cajoling your classmates to show up on a Saturday. And best of luck to all of you. And thank you, everyone that was able to join us today. And yeah, thank you.